Anticipated each year by government jurisdictions and businesses around the world, Deloitte's annual Tech Trends Report identifies those trends likely to disrupt businesses and affect government processes. To provide a preview of the Deloitte Tech Trends 2020, please welcome to the stage Deloitte Government and Public Services Chief Technology Officer and National Emerging Technology Director, Scott Buchholz.
So is the mic on? The mic is on. All right. Hello, everybody. My goal is going to be to not be played off the stage. I think I can manage, so it shouldn't be any problem. It's good to see you all here today. I'm delighted to be here. I actually have one of the best jobs. So I get to peer into the future, 18 to 24 months every year. Deloitte has been doing for about 11 years our annual Tech Trends Report. We look across industries and across geographies at trends in enterprise IT. We summarize them. We interview clients, and we include their stories, and then we publish our research. And so what you'll find is, over the course of time, we've actually published information about things that we see changing, things that we've seen coming, and a variety of other things. The great thing is that because of this, I get to come and talk to folks like all of you in detail in your offices, with your teams, or what have you, and basically discuss what we've found in our findings. The nice thing, like I talked about, is there are client stories behind every single one of these trends. We do that to make sure that we actually are not just smoking our own exhaust, but we're actually onto something. And you can read them too, because the research that gets published includes them. That research will actually be available next Wednesday. Knock on wood. So as long as there's no giant national security emergency between now and then we'll be publishing then. And so I'm looking forward to that. You should too. All right. Like I mentioned, we've been doing this for about 11 years. Keeping in the Star Wars theme, we have our lovely fade diagram here. You can see at the top the things that are the most recent that we've been working on, and I'll go through all these in a little bit of detail for all of you, just briefly. And you'll be able to get this diagram starting next week online. The nice thing about this picture is because we've been doing this for a while, and because we've been trying to be 18 to 24 months ahead of where things are going, it's sometimes useful to look backwards in time and actually say, hey, here are some of the things that we've been doing today. Here are the things we're thinking about. What does that mean for the future? Because our goal is actually to help you not try to predict the far-flung future. That tends to be a little bit hard and abstract, but actually to figure out what you should be doing in the near term, what some of the best companies and organizations are doing in the near term, and that you can actually be thinking about doing to better leverage technology. The things across the top are actually our macro forces, which I'll talk about briefly in a second. But what we've realized over the years is that technology is really, there's a bit of a taxonomy sometimes that we look at and use. And that taxonomy is useful because it helps us think about the kinds of technology that exist, the kinds of evolutions that are occurring, and the way that actually you can combine these things to work together. So, what's up for 2020? These are our 7 technology trends for 2020. I'll go through each one of these in a little bit of detail, just to give you a feeling for what they're like. And then, like I said, next week you can download the full report. It will be probably about 140 pages by the time we're done, so a little light reading. But what I'd encourage you to do is at least read the executive summaries, find the things that interest you the most, go read the client stories. We have stories of organizations as diverse as AWS and FedEx, to Bridgestone, to the Air Traffic Controllers Association of Australia, and everything in between. So our first trend, macro technology forces, like I was mentioning, is actually a combination of the taxonomy of change that we've seen over the past decade, that we see coming in future decades, and a way of helping you think about how to structure, how to think about technology and the change that's going on. And the thing that we've learned through our research is the organizations that are the furthest ahead and that are doing the most interesting things are actually deliberately mixing across all of those different areas. Right? They're a little bit of what I told you about on the last slide, but also other things besides. Ethical technology and trust. So obviously everybody is familiar with the ethics of AI and other things going on. What's really interesting is if you look behind that and you read about and you think about some of the problems we collectively have with trust, what you realize is that technology is at the root of some of our problems. 40 years ago, all of our data was stored in manila folders and filing cabinets. You couldn't mix it and do all sorts of interesting things with it the way you can today. And a lot of us are now concerned because there are organizations whom we are not convinced who have more information about us and know more about us than we sometimes do about ourselves, and we're not always convinced that they're doing it in our best interest. And what we believe is that in order to solve that problem, there's an ethical technology dimension to it that the CIO owns, but there is a training and a tone setting that the executives own. And really, to solve the trust problem, all of us need to think about this from a 360-degree point of view. There are a lot of different areas to focus on, and we go into all of them in some depth in our article. Finance and the future of IT. So nobody ever has enough money for IT. The funny thing is I was listening to one of the stories up here. You know, government tends to spend 80, 75, 80, right, % of its money on operations and maintenance within technology in terms of annual budgets. Do you know what the best corporate organizations are currently running at? 50. Right? So if I told you there was a way to get 30% of your budget out of operations and maintenance and into changing the business and changing the mission and other things, that might get your attention. And a lot of what finance and the future of IT is about is figuring out not just how do we get that budget back, what can we do to actually be more effective and efficient, but how do you work with the finance organization, right? So it's essentially how do CIOs need to engage with CFOs in order to do things in a materially different way going forward. And there are more creative sources of capital available now than ever. Sometimes a little bit less so to the government, but certainly for commercial organizations and some of the state governments that have a little more flexibility, there are a lot of things that are possible that you can look into. Digital twins. So digital twins, what are digital twins? They're virtual models of physical reality. They've been used in manufacturing for decades, right? We design, we engineer the thing virtually, and then we build it physically. But what we're starting to see happen is that the capabilities of the models are evolving. The ability to put sensors on things is radically increasing. The cost of doing so is dropping. The fidelity of the models and the way people are thinking about using them is changing and transforming. So Bridgestone Tires in Europe is actually trying to figure out not just how to design tires with models, but actually how to use the technology of digital twins to simulate tire usage on vehicles. In fact, they actually need to sell, because of the way Europeans work, they sell fleets priced by the kilometer. And so they actually have to figure out a business model where they can price tires by the kilometer, not the unit. And in order to optimize that, what they realized is they had to figure out what was the usage pattern on the tire, what was the usage pattern of the vehicle, how did that fleet differ from this other one, all these sorts of things that made it so that they actually decided that the right thing to do was to build a digital twin. So all of those sorts of things are really exciting. By the way, we also got to talk to the Australian air traffic controllers group. And one of the things they were recognizing as they were looking at digital twins to provide a digital twin of the airspace is that the lower airspace, if you think about the upper airspace where planes fly today, that's something where there's a person-to-person communication. You have a finite number of airplanes in the sky. They all have pilots. They're highly trained. There's a person in an air tower talking to them. But we have lower airspace now with unmanned drones and self-flying taxis and all sorts of other things that we can see as we look around here at CES. And you can't expect that the human air traffic controllers are going to be able to keep up with that. And so, in fact, you need digital technology that can manage the airspace in order to manage the lower airspace anyway. And so they're getting into that ahead of time, recognizing that they can start by managing the upper airspace. So I asked them if they could come help the FAA, because I don't know about you, but my planes never seem to be on time. Anyway, human experience platforms. This one's really interesting. So organizations are increasingly looking at the ability of what's sometimes called affective computing, but to be able to sense and read human emotions through cameras, through microphones and voice stress, through the words that we're using, basically to be able to determine how stressed are we, how upset are we, how angry are we, how happy are we, and increasingly are trying to figure out how to tailor interactions with us based on that. So if you think about it, if you're calling your bank and you're upset, and the system is able to look and see you recently pulled up your account and noticed that there was a bill that we just sent you, those things are probably correlated. So the notion of being able to look at the context of what's going on with you as a customer, an employee, the ability to sense the emotion and make decisions based on it is increasingly going to become possible, is increasingly possible today. And wouldn't it be nice if, for example, I could walk up to the kiosk in the Postal Service with my package, and instead of forcing me to go through 5 different levels of menus to order the postage that I want, that it just said, hey, Scott, I see that you have a package for your grandmother. Would you like the postage to send it to her? The technology is increasingly there and increasingly present to be able to do this. And the question that's increasingly starting to happen is, why not? Why shouldn't we do this? By the way, sometimes we say, well, we're the government. People's expectations are lower. We can't get all of this. But the thing I would remind you of is e-government started happening after Amazon and Google showed up, right? So if you remember, a decade, 15 years ago, suddenly government expectations for what we were able to do started going up dramatically, and it was in part because suddenly we could order things easily online. And so what winds up happening is the best customer experiences that you have anywhere drive your expectations everywhere. Architecture awakens. So as we look across all this change in technology, what organizations are increasingly realizing is that they've taken their most senior technologists, the people you call solution architects or technical architects or what have you, and we've put them in governance roles over portfolios that have no material impact, right? Or they do, but maybe not the impact they could. And what they're increasingly doing is pulling them out of the governance silos and putting them in charge of projects and programs directly or products in agile ways. And so suddenly we're getting more value out of the technologists, the most senior technologists in organizations. And that's increasingly important because the expectations and the desires and other things are accelerating. So this becomes increasingly important. And then last but not least, Horizon Next. We recognize that as you look across the spectrum of things going on in technology, it is really hard to figure out what's coming next and where things are going. And having a deliberate way of basically projecting the future and working the path backwards is actually really important. And so these are some of our strategies and approaches for thinking about how to do so. So that in a nutshell is our report, which like I said, will be available next week. You can go online and download it when it shows up. We will also have a brief government overlay, which will be available probably sometime in February. And the thing that we're always delighted to do is come and talk to you one-on-one or in small groups about our research. I can actually tell you in that context the stories behind the stories and a little bit more than I can here in public. So I look forward to any or all of you calling me or sending me a note to ask about that. But in the meantime, it was a pleasure talking to you today. So thank you very much.